This is a pretty big topic, and I'm going to try to do what I can with it in an hour and a half. Um, and it's really three parts. The first part is to talk about the nature of the emergency, why it is an emergency, why we need to be acting as a people across the planet. And I'm pretty darn sure that some of what I'm going to show you is going to make you upset. So I'm telling you that right away. It certainly makes me upset. But there's the second part of the talk is basically how do you adjust what you're doing in gardens or farms to this situation of where our climate is changing. But the third part is how we could actually fix an enormous part of this, or at least slow down this thing to the point where some of the other things we need to do, like totally change the way we do things on this planet, have time to get done. So there's a lot we can do, and it makes a huge difference as to what the effect will be, even in the short run. So I want to tell you that because I'm going to start by telling you some pretty bad news. And basically, when you have a hole in your roof, you want somebody to tell you about how big the hole is and what needs to be done. But given that there is things you can do and that there are important things to do, then I think that's worth doing. So I'm going to get moving on this. First thing I'm going to do is weather. Weather is mainly developed from contrast in temperatures. Equator's hot, poles are cold, and hot air rises, cold air doesn't rise as fast. And what that means is that the areas have high pressure because the air sits, and the warmer places have lower pressure because the air rises. And that's where Houston is, right here. If you just keep going around the globe, you'll see where we are, subtropical high pressure areas. So a lot of the air on the whole planet depends on how cold it is here versus here, or here versus here. And awful lot of what happens in terms of our weather is simply that. And it has been like that for millions of years. So there's an example of this. This is just air pressure, and basically equator is lower air pressure than the subtropics, and the subarctic is lower air pressure than the Arctic. So what you do is you get air moving from cold to warmer, and the warmer rises. And since it's high density air here, up top it's low density, and so you get wind moving around. All sorts of things like rocks and pavement and mountains and tree leaves and so on have different temperatures, so you also get different pressures there as well. High pressure moves to low pressure, you get wind, and when you get warm winds meeting cold air, they collide, they get condensation because of the way things work. And the same thing pretty much goes on in oceans. Warm air rises, and you get low pressure, cold air moves in. Oceans do this too, warm water, cold water. So for example, this is what you get on the Earth's surface because our planet spins as well. And you get these prevailing winds, and you get these convection loops here. But I got this in a handout if you registered for the class, and you can study it, but the point is basically that's the way it normally works when normally before we started changing temperatures around here. And that's what happens in the oceans. So you have warmer water on top, moving north. As it gets colder, it sinks and goes down deeper and moves along like this. And so we get this nice Gulf Stream thing going into the Gulf and then goes back up here, warming all of Europe. And this works all the way around the globe. So basically, you have these things having our climate, and climate, of course, affects how we can grow things. But what happens if you start adding insulation every year? Transport industry, these are all greenhouse gas contributions here. And some of the greenhouse gases go back into the ocean or back into the land from plants. But about 59% of this stuff is staying in the air every year, and that's what's causing the insulation to rise every year and make the planet hotter. And I have a lot of these slides from Project Drawdown, which is available on the internet, and is really valuable source if you're looking at what is the problem and what can be done about it. But here's the point. We keep getting hotter because we're doing this back out again, and ideally even more, so we could start reducing it. So the real question for us all is, how do you do that? So what happens if you start warming things? Okay, so if you start changing the temperatures between the Arctic, the Antarctic, the equator, how hot that is, how hot the water is in the Gulf or the ocean, then what starts happening is the winds start changing and we start getting very different kinds of weather. And it's not easy to figure out what will happen. It's not easy for scientists to figure this out. It's very complicated. And so you can't say, well, we're going to get more hurricanes in the Gulf or less hurricanes. But this sort of thing happens. This is Harvey prediction about several days before it hit, but notice this isolated 40 inches possible. They told us this several days ahead of time. This is something that can happen. The polar vortex can weaken, and we suddenly get all kinds of cold weather down here, hot weather in the winter, or some years we get really hot and other years really cold. Is that it doesn't mean because we're heating things up that necessarily we're going to get warmer on some day in the winter. It could mean we're going to get colder and could be very cold. So the point being is that it's chaotic, it's chaos. Here are forecast rain. This is the IPCC type models. This is forecast rainfall changes between 1981 and 2081. Notice that they are thinking that this is going to dry up quite a bit. In other places, it's going to get very range. 40% change we're talking about in here in the Southwest. Looks like Houston is just going to barely stay pretty much the same. But that's a forecast. This is forecast temperature changes by 2100. We're looking at, what is this for us here? It's about 5 to 6 degree change average temperature for the year. And look at this stuff. Everything gets hotter. And what happens when it gets hotter? What happens is we evaporate more water, and plants have a harder time making it, other than agave, which is why I had it on the list. This is a prediction from various years. 2030, we are looking at drought conditions that are 2, 3, or 4 standard deviations, which is, if you know something about statistics, very unprecedented levels of drought just 10 years from now. Look at this, 10 years from now, 2030. And 2060, look at this. What this back? Look at Hudson's Bay up here, and that's 2030. And then look at 2060. And then look at 2100. Look where it is on Hudson's Bay. So it's only raining like it is now north of Hudson's Bay. So what I'm saying is that rainfall is, look at Europe. Look at Europe. Look at this stuff. Look at the Sahara. Sahara starts getting actually a little bit wetter, which doesn't mean wet, it just means wetter than it was. So basically, these are what serious peer-reviewed scientists think are problems. And this agriculture, water, and so forth is going to be in big trouble. This is the IPCC 2018, and risks of severe impacts, climate-related hazards, and so on. Red indicates severe and widespread risks. Yellow indicates impacts, risks are detectable and attributable to climate change. 1.1 degrees right now above pre-industrial temperatures. And this is where we are on all this stuff, only global aggregate impacts. Large-scale singular events, we're already there. We're heading for this really quickly. If we're going to stay under 1.5, we have to do major changes by 2030. So you can see what the UN thinks is going to happen. This is all agriculture stuff. Purple indicates very high risk, severe impacts. Warm water coral, pretty much already gone. Mangroves at 1.5, small scale latitude fisheries, already in danger. Arctic, small scale low latitude, Arctic region already. You can see this level of stuff. We're right here, right now, and we're headed for this really fast. And we're not even talking about up here. So the argument is, and it's very poor nations around the world are going to have really, really difficult times. But when they say that, they should mention that that does not mean that things here are going to be that easy. So look at this. I mean, you know, Africa, Asia got really major problems. Sustained food supply disruptions globally, periodic food shocks across the region. Look at yellow, though. Infrequent price hikes affect individual countries. We're talking 2050, which is just 30 years from now. So basically, this whole area here just itself is expecting to have significant problems. In 30% of our food supply from other countries, though. And 32% of our vegetables come from other countries, 55% of the fruit, 94% of the seafood. So that food supply is being grown in those places exactly where they're talking about this being a problem. And the percentage of imports has been increasing rapidly. This is food grown in the United States. And most of it, the top one is California, 75% more than Iowa, which is number 2. But all of the next 4 of these are all growing people. So California is a place where most of our fresh produce comes from that isn't grown locally. And if you look at 2030, it doesn't really look like they're going to have too much water to do this with. And that's just 2030. Now, when you get into plants, in this formula here, and you might ask yourself, do you know what that is? But that's the formula for photosynthesis. That's what plants do. They take carbon out of the air and water out of the ground, use light and make sugars, which feed their leaves and fruit and blossoms and give off oxygen. On hot days, as it gets hotter, 90% of the plant's water is used just for cooling, just for air conditioning. And if you don't get water, you don't get growth, and water does a whole bunch of other things in plants. But the point being is that you need rainfall, and the hotter it is, the more of that water has to be used for air conditioning. Let's talk about plants themselves, temperatures. Tomatoes, they need temperatures in this range to pollinate. Corn, temperatures, they only pollinate in this temperatures. It's too hot today for corn to pollinate. Lettuce doesn't sprout above 75. Okra needs soil above 70, so we're going to still have okra for a while. And this is the general picture of the way plants work, and actually animals do too. There's an optimal temperature at which basically they thrive for whatever that species is. Tomatoes at one temperature, okra at another, and so on. Lettuce at another one. And there's a range at which they grow, a little colder, a little hotter, and at temperatures at which they don't grow very well further out, temperatures where they don't grow at all out, and temperatures where it's too hot for them to live and too cold for them to live. And basically, when you grow plants in your garden, in your farm, they basically need a certain amount of time in certain temperatures, and they can never go out there. So that's basically what it is. Most food plants don't grow over 86. They stop growing at 95 and die in this range here. I should add that agave you can make chiquilla with it, but unfortunately you can't make chiquilla if they've been temperatures up in the hundreds. You've got to get below that. But agave will not die anyway, so that's where I put agave on there. You can't keep heating the planet up because lots of these things aren't going to actually produce. These things stop growing. They don't necessarily die, but they stop growing if the temperature is 61%, temperatures are over 80. Common supermarket vegetables don't grow above 80 degrees. You can see what the numbers are. This sesame oil and peanut oil are basically what you're going to wind up with if you're using vegetable oil. These are the months in the year when the different places have temperatures below these amounts. And those of you who are out of the Houston area, out of Southeast Texas, these are all Southeast Texas stations, but you could ask the same question for El Paso or Maine or wherever. Essentially, that's the situation we're in. We are heating up the planet, we're drying up the planet, and we need both water and lower temperatures in order to grow food. And a lot of the food is grown in countries that are going to not be able to grow food. And it's questionable, especially in the longer several decades from now, whether or not North America will be able to grow food either. Certainly difficult. So that's basically a summary of the problem we've got. So I'm going to talk about solutions the rest of the time. The first part is micro solutions, which are basically stuff you can do yourself to deal with the problems of trying to grow plants, food plants yourself. And then the last part is how large efforts across the planet could really make a big difference. So let's talk about Southeast Texas climate. If you're somewhere else, similar sorts of things probably apply. There's a range of different temperatures from, in our case, from the Gulf Islands like Galveston to interior areas like Crockett. And they're not the same temperatures, as I guess the simple way to put it. It's also true that urban areas are warmer than the rural areas surrounding them. So that, for example, if you look at some place like Third Ward in Houston versus Anahuac, there's quite a big difference in temperature, even though they're pretty much the same distance from the Gulf. And Somerville Dam is south of Colorado, at least the coldest temperatures in the winter are. And there's huge differences, of course, day to night, winter to summer, and these giant pressure oscillations on the planet like El Nino also affect in the same yard or farm where you're talking about, because open places facing north are much colder than sheltered areas on the south side of buildings and things. Here's some general things to say. Urban areas are warmer by about 7 degrees typically than rural areas. And 7 degrees makes a huge difference when you're growing things. And urban areas heat up earlier in the spring and stay hot later in the fall. And they're going to the more densely populated, the warmer it is. In terms of night temperatures, the less forested it is and the more rural it is, the colder it's going to be. But basically, it is also true that how cold it is depends a lot on how close you are to the Gulf. If these are the average low temperatures for 2007 to 17, a recent decade, this is the average low temperature for 34. Typically, most Januaries never goes below 34. Sometimes it does. But the average low temperature for the month is 34. In Hobby, 29. Intercontinental Airport, 27. Tomball, 25. Conroe, 23. Somerville Dam, 18. The difference in growing something in winter between, say, a place where the average low temperature for the month is 34 versus, say, 18 is an enormous, enormous difference. A plastic hoop house here and lots of things, even like basil, will probably went. So it's just a giant difference. And that's what I regard as normal. We're not talking about global warming here. That's just normal. And it's true for every difference. And so basically, this is the summary. Maritime areas near the Gulf and Bay are cooler in the day and warmer at night than further inland. And this is in your notes, and I'm not going to reiterate this a lot, but it basically means that it's really important where you are to know what your temperatures have been like the last 10 years. And the more research you do on that, and the better you understand it, and then sync it with the plants you want to grow, the better you're going to do as a gardener. Chilies like lower nighttime temperatures do many plants, and that's one of the reasons why you probably can grow chilies far from the Gulf much easier than in the Gulf. Now, this is a recent Harris County vegetable planting calendar schedule based on what has always been the case in temperatures, and these schedules are based on assumptions about what the temperatures will be. But the problem is the temperatures are rising, and so you can't have a static planting schedule. What you need to do is not just the planting schedule, but what plants you're actually planting. Because something that wouldn't grow in, say, Conroe last year, or like 20 years ago, actually will grow there now because it doesn't get as cold in the wintertime. Um, so you need to actually have this thing set up for your location and what decade we're in. So there are a bunch of questions about these schedules, but basically the simple fact is that they have been assumed to be static, and they can't be static. They have to be dynamic. You have to be able to adjust your schedule and what you plant to the temperatures you are likely to have, and that's only can be based on what's been happening the last few years. That's the only way to guess. And just for your information, there's a USDA zone maps at the moment are based on 1980 through 2010. So what do we do given that the temperatures are changing and the rainfall is changing? Our problem. So what is our problem here? Well, this was Harvey, Lake Conroe. See Lake Conroe right there? And this was 2011. This is Lake Conroe in 2011. Look at the docks. This was a cotton farm. And remember I said we're getting chaotic weather. These are exceptional drought. 4 standard deviations, which is, I think, what, it's either 1 in 1,000, something like that. 1,000 years, this would be the worst one, according to their statistics. Obviously questionable, but that's what that means. 4 standard deviations. And this is the top 10 wettest listed. Hobby, 4 of the 10 wettest ever have happened since 1997. 2 of the driest have happened since 1999. This is intercontinental combined with downtown Houston dating back to 1889. And again, 5 of the wettest years. Look at this. 5 of the wettest years, 5 have happened since 2000. So basically, in terms of rainfall, this was this period, we had 1 every 30 years, 1 every 20, 1 every 3.3 years now. Notice the difference. And drought is pretty much the same. But point being is that we're having to grow things in very strange situations. Texas is getting hotter. Jim Blackburn made that point with a different graph last week. I like to show Hobby's 10 hottest ones. You can find this on the internet. The National Weather Service. Just look at the 10 hottest years ever for Hobby. This is since 1931. These are the 10 coolest. This is the planet-wise, this is what we've got. Looks pretty much like Hobby, doesn't it? This is since 1880 for the whole planet. These are the years. We took the urban weather stations, Galveston, Hobby. I did this with the state climatologist at A&M. The 33% of the hottest years ever at these 3 airports happened since 2010. And of rural stations, 30% did since 2010. And in the cold places, the coldest ever, 0% happened since 2010. 0% of the years at the rural places either. You can see the discrepancy. You can see how much hotter things are getting. So it's clearly happening fast. So basically, when we grow things, we have to adapt. Our plants need to be able to tolerate this stuff, so we need to know what we're dealing with. And we can't rule out these polar vortex problems either. So what we need is tables that list these possibilities. That's what I've spent about 7 years trying to figure out and have now published in my book. The different temperature gradients and what is likely to happen. So I don't think I need to go over this particularly, except to say that what you want to know is what temperatures does a plant that you want to grow need. Let's suppose collards. What temperatures do they need? How long do they need them? Like 3 months or what? Or 30 years if it's a fruit tree, say. And what have temperatures been in recent years, so you can decide whether you have enough good temperatures to grow collards or not, say. Anyway, I did this for 140 food plants in my book. Find out where to buy market on Saturdays, which is happening right now. This is a piece of the temperature table, and I mentioned collards. It needs about 2 to 2.5 months to start harvesting them. You'd like it to last many months after that so you could keep harvesting, but they don't grow above 75 degrees or below 40, and the really light temperatures around here is where they really grow. They're not going to get killed by any temperatures we have in Southeast Texas. And, but this is how much time you need. And this is true for a whole lot of plants. So basically, I've got you a table, and where there's blanks, it's because I simply don't know what the best night air is for cumin, and I can't find out. And I can't find this out for corn either, by the way. Winter low temperatures, now we get into fruits. Papayas are killed by 29 degrees, 22 to 28. So basically, you need to know how likely, because lemons are supposed to last for decades, how often are you going to get temperatures that will kill lemons? Well, if you're in Galveston, really you won't. Because for the period 1992 to 2012. Now, if we did this from 2012 to 2022, you might see that this starts to move. Galveston in recent years had a winter low temperature of 42 one year. So it's actually had 5% up in here. It's getting warmer in Galveston because the Gulf is heating up. And for things that lose their leaves in the winter, like pears and peaches, you need to know how much chill they get. And again, this is a percentage-wise, 63%. 45% of the time their chill is below 600 chill units. So basically, in order to grow fruit trees, you're going to have to know this, and the data is based on this period. Now, if we said 2007 to 2017, you might see something slightly different here. But if you're in sugar land, let's say, this is what it's telling you about what temperatures. You're most likely going to get something around 800, at least in those 30-year period. But if we go to the last 10 years, you may well be up here. So if you planted something that needed 800 or so, and now you really need 600, you're going to find it doesn't produce well. So it's important to know what's been happening the last 10 years since it's getting hotter. So anyway, we created a schedule because most people aren't going to try to figure out what their weather has been for the last 10 years. Created a schedule for 28 different places around Southeast Texas. of what can be planted. And what it turns out is that what can be planted really depends on how low the temperature is for the season. So if you're in what I call zone A, the fall average temperature is 67 degrees. That's the low temperature. And in the winter, it's zone A is 50 degrees. Myself, we're southwest corner 610 Loop area of Houston. I am in zone C in the fall, spring, and summer. These are the average summer temperature, which is June, July, and August. And that's the average low. And I'm in zone B in the wintertime. But basically, wherever you are, you're in one of these zones, and you can, this is what I found out looking at different weather stations, what zones they were in, and that's in the book also. So Harris, Port of Houston, for example, is in zone C in zone D in the winter, but I'm in Houston also, and I'm in zone B. So it just depends a lot on where you are. And this is the colder areas, and they go up. Madisonville is in the winter in zone G. And it really makes a big difference. And if you look at Conroe versus Tomball versus Intercontinental Airport, you can see that they are not quite the same. So, but basically, if you know what your zone is, your vegetable zone for each season, you can then plug it into the planting schedule for that zone. And so I'm just going to illustrate this. These are the zones A, B, C, D, E, and F. And this is if, for example, you wanted to grow mustard, you can grow it in October or plant it in October, November, or December. And then again, and that's in zone A, in Galveston, for example. In zone B, where I am, it doesn't recommend planting except October, November, not December. I mean, it probably grow, but it isn't ideal. And if you get to zone C, which would be, say, sugarland in winter, we're even slightly different schedule. And then if you get up here, you see, if you're up here in zone F, we're recommending only one short time in October. So I guess what I'm saying is that it really depends a lot on where you are and what decade you're in as to what you should plant when. Average low temperature in the winter, then these are some recommendations for what to plant. And what it would say is, for example, that a pomelo is not going to be recommended if your average winter low is 25 degrees or lower. You could grow it and you might have some luck. And if you're down here, Conroe, I'd say you're wasting your time. So that's basically what we're saying, is that basically your planting needs to be smart based on the temperature needs of the plants and how much time you are likely to have those temperatures. So that is some of what I have to say about what to do with your own garden. It's certainly a good idea to grow your own, and that's because our food supply is not a secure thing. And every type of way important. Let's go to using plants to slow warming. This is kind of the nice part of this talk, I think, because there's a lot we can do. Start out with what the Paris Agreement said. This is where we were headed, and the agreement, in terms of the ambition, gets us here, and there are scenarios where we could get to here. This is based on 2000 and whatever when they had this agreement, but we're still right here. So there's a possibilities of things we could do. You see, like this, there are things we can do. So we have lots of possible models. There are lots of possible errors, but it's worth pointing out that the projected temperatures, 50% chance of 4 degrees or higher if we keep the policy that, for example, our present government has. We have no chance of keeping it below 2 degrees with the present policy. There is no possibility of that by 2100. And there's nothing that says the end of time is 2100. What about 2200? So we're going to have to make very big changes. We want to keep it to 1.5, a 50% chance. We have to head in this direction very quickly. We are talking about reducing CO2 below present 10% at least in order to get a 50% chance of keeping it below 2 degrees. So there's some major changes have to be made. And that means on all sorts of things. Industry has to change, transportation has to change, all sorts of stuff has to change. This is a sustainability model. This is a regional rivalry one where people don't pay attention. We don't have to get into the details of what this means, but the point being is that the path we choose has an enormous effect on how bad this gets. Depending on how old you are, I'm 78, this stuff here is going to, I might see this, but I'm probably not going to see this. But those of you who are, under 50 anyway, or have relatives under 50 or family, basically this, so we need to do major things, like to do this, we need this, is what they say, of greenhouse gases by 2030. Net zero by 2050. Both of these things are relatively unlikely. So the easiest place in cost, labor, and impact is in reforestation and revegetation, because there's a lot of possibility to do that. That's the important thing to really point out, that this is a possibility. It is not only doable, but it doesn't even major consequences. Right now, we pump this amount of stuff into the air out of the ocean and take this amount back. So we are sequestering about 10 gigatons in the ocean every year to plants every year, but we're dumping 40 gigatons into the air, so we're gaining every year on this. But all you would have to do is alter this just a little bit, and we could at least slow this thing down. This is from Project Drawdown, and this is the sources of the problem right here. And these are the places where the most stuff is being pumped into the air, these 3 places. Yes, we can get electric cars. Yes, we can do all kinds of great things to our buildings, but they're not going to have as big an effect as changing these things. And especially land sinks, which is to say plants, if we increase that, there is an enormous amount of ability there to do that. It doesn't require that we turn all our electricity immediately into solar or something. A lot of the things that need to be changed are going to take a lot of money. This is comparatively cheaper. And there are all sorts of things that need changing to make this thing work in the long run, but we don't have a long run. And this is an immediate thing that can be done pretty quickly. So there's several ways we can do this. Stop reducing the carbon sequestered by existing vegetation. I probably didn't say that as well as I should, but what it means is that right now we are destroying too much vegetation. We need to stop doing that. And so then there are some other things we can do. And this is one place. You need to protect these places, wetlands, peatlands. We need to have policies, strong policies that keep wetlands the way they are. We need to stop cutting down forests and many other things. So basically the first place is to stop messing this up. Some of what we used to have on this continent in the way of carbon. You can sequester carbon. These are pretty amazing. And they're all over the planet. So when I talk about recarbonating the planet, taking carbon out of the air, there's a lot of possibility. You might be looking at the carbon that you can see, but there's an awful lot of carbon in the soil, more in the soil than there is actually in the plants. Put large amounts of carbon in the soil. Basically, with the debris that falls when these things die and when the roots that die in these plants get eaten up as calories by bacteria and fungi. And if you have a well-functioning ecosystem of either forests or prairies, you're going to have a biologically active soil. And you look at the number of organisms in that soil. This is living creatures. And when they die, of course, eaten by other things and so on, bacteria and fungi eat these dead animals and plants, and then they are eaten in turn by nematodes and mites, and so on and so on and so on. And when these things die, they release nitrogen and phosphorus, and that's how plants get their food, basically. One of the things it does is that they grow through the soil, they take out minerals, they turn clay into tilth, which creates air and water, and so water gets absorbed more easily into the soil rather than running off. All kinds of amazing things happen, but you end up with this wonderful soil that we get from composted materials. Middle school sort of diagram of a soil food web. It's much more sophisticated than this, of course, in terms of actual science. It looks more like this, but The point being is that that's what happens when you plant forests and prairies, if you do it right, with pictures, not just words. But there you've got some bacteria, and a protozoa gets to eat this stuff. And there's a nematode. It's a tiny microscopic roundworm that eats bacteria. And this is one that goes after fungus, because fungus eat the lignins, the wood in rotting wood and rotting leaves, rotting straw, and so on. And predatory nematode eating nematode, that these things eat nematodes themselves, these nematodes. And you might, well, that just get me aside here. So basically, all sorts of amazing things happen when you have these kinds of soils. Another thing that happens is that you get two kinds of fungi, what are called endomycorrhizae and ectomycorrhizae, that basically attach themselves to roots in one way or another, and send out tiny things much smaller than roots to get minerals and other materials, and feed them to the plants in return for sugars that the plants give them. And in some cases, up to 80% of the carbohydrates that are created by the plants are actually fed to the microbes as a payment for various minerals and hormones that they provide the plant. And the fascinating fact is that what happens in our own intestines is somewhat similar. It's a similar process. There is an endomycorrhizae in a vegetable plant right here. Here are the little hyphae or root-like structures. And this is a ectomycorrhizae on a tree. They're two basically very distinct, but almost 90% of the plants on the planet have these things, including most types of vegetables, provided you don't till the soil or screw up this thing with pesticides and stuff. So basically, we could either treat these forests and prairies badly, or we could grow them. This is some bad treating. This is a quote from Bill Mollison, the permaculture founder, but basically doing this stuff is not helping things at all. They do this with rice fields deliberately, and that has to stop. Basically, you're producing methane here, and this is soil that doesn't absorb water because it doesn't have tilth. Fertilizers basically turn this whole business into desert. This stuff is horrible kind of practice in terms of any sensible way to treat the planet. This kind of thing just further wrecks things, and basically livestock grown this way with animal feed is one place where we can really do something to change the world. This is deforestation by time period. This says before 1700, we lost 400 million hectares of temperate forest and a little bit of tropical. And then you see these periods here and as we get further and further along, we're not losing much temperate forest anymore because there's hardly none left, but we're losing tropical rainforests really fast. And these are millions of hectares, mind you, 100 million hectares between 1996 and 2010. Why are we losing forests in the tropics? To grow soybeans. That's a major reason. Feed to animals, so we can have McDonald's. Deforestation, Brazil, the top soy producer in the world. Take this, take this. If we were to stop eating animal meat that soy and corn, if as a planet, we just outlawed it, we would save something like 94%. The amount of natural vegetation cleared could decrease by 94%. And this is what this is doing, these different animals. That's a United Nations report. So basically we got rid of this stuff. Just have to give up your hamburgers or something. If we gave up this stuff, we would basically have lots of land we could plant forests and prairies on pretty damn fast. This is what they say is the major cause of this stuff. Growing hay, growing corn, soybean, all this stuff is creating this huge amount. And this is the greenhouse gases that are being used and what we get out in any of these animals here. Any of this is a bad way to do protein in terms of land use. So basically we could stop doing that and we could start doing things the way we should be doing them. And it is possible, if we were to increase food production without increasing the amount of land we were using, which could be done if we reduce the amount of, say, beef we were eating from animal feed, if we stop wasting food, like we didn't do any Coca-Cola at all, or we didn't waste as much food as we do waste, you could actually make it possible for the 9 billion, unless a lot of people die because they're already born, are going to be of childbearing age. So if they have children, that's where we're headed. These are ways we could do it. There are lots and lots of ways to do it. There are all sorts of things that can be done in agriculture. What we do with manure, what we do, there's all sorts of things you can feed animals that don't cause this problem, at least some of the problems. But this is what we could do with different models of effort. So it's not impossible to do. Then there's a whole effort to just grow things organically and build carbon in the soil rather than mine the soils with artificial chemical fertilizers. So that's basically a plan that would work. So organics, we would solve some of the problem. Basically, high quality organic matter leads to high quality organic matter and increasing amounts of carbon in the soil. And you have notes on that, but basically that's what we're looking at. At farm levels, you can do no-till organic farming. They are rolling this stuff, they're killing it by rolling it. And soil improvement crop, which is just allow this to rot as mulch, or it may be they're harvesting, but I'm not sure what they're doing there. Tree intercropping is another method. You could be growing nut crops, and there are things you could do here that would have a big effect. And if you've ever been in some of these commercial orange orchards in the valley or something, they're really not doing this at all. So there's a big opportunities here. If we only fed livestock certain types of things, we could we could have an enormous effect on what's happening. And all this together, we could reduce the amount of carbon emissions we create from food by 48, minus 48, minus 4, minus 12. Basically all these things together. So a real policy, real effort, everybody putting their shoulders to it, we could, it could change really pretty fast. And people eating locally, many reasons. It creates a much more resilience. So we have backup for our food supply, and more you can do to grow your own and help other people learn to grow their own, the better. There's all sorts of ways this can happen. It's important to help efforts to teach people how to do it. Really important. Our fruit tree sales at Urban Harvest and around Southeast Texas are really important. Trees do all sorts of wonderful things, and we can get people growing trees, and they actually benefit in major ways from it. And they spread the information. So there's an awful lot you can actually just do in any area, any part of the world, really. And then, of course, if you're whatever you're not growing, if it is being grown locally, buy local, especially organic local. So all of that stuff is possible, and certainly Urban Harvest has been pioneering that, and some of the kind of OBA has been doing that too. And the other thing we can do is we can take land and we can plant forests and prairies. And just repeating this, we get our oxygen from plants, so you don't really want to be cutting down our plants. But this is a major opportunity. Plants, trees do a lot of things. They change rainfall patterns in major ways. So we don't just put carbon in the soil. When we put trees especially up, we reduce evaporation. Some places snow melt if it's cold enough. And that means that the water soaks in rather than just run downhill fast and disappear. It also, forests shift winds upwards and compresses air and rainfall downwind. So basically, it increases rainfall, which increases plants. And they send bacteria and pollen into the air, and that's how rain nucleates around these little particles and create clouds which reflect light and heat, which is important because that reduces the amount of heat that can get trapped. And the other thing is that if you may notice, if you ever tried putting your hand on, say, some asphalt in the summertime, you might notice that it was pretty hot. And if you touched a leaf right nearby, you would find it's not hot at all. So basically, the amount of heat that's being radiated is quite different in plants than it is in, say, asphalt or a composite roof on your house. And it's an enormous difference. And I could get into the physics of that, but basically plants don't send heat back up the way lots of substances do, including bare earth. So these are just some of the things that forests do for us. You see how little runoff you typically get here. That you get a lot of water soaking in, partly because there's a lot of porousness in the soil because of the tilth, and a lot of water being given off into the air. And that's cooling this whole area here. So here, let's get into this. This is what the scientists think is the case. Typically, they put about 10 times as much moisture in the air as bare ground. And so it has a major effect in terms of how much moisture there is in the air. Now, you might think if you live in Houston that you don't want any more humidity, but actually that humidity is a major important thing in several ways, and we'll get to it in a bit. So most of those clouds come from moisture given off by those plants. And of course, the clouds make rain, which then gives more plants. And the way this thing happens is water comes out of the pores underneath this leaf, the stomata. And here's a picture of a tomato stomata right here. Basically, water goes out, and mostly it's used in hot climates for cooling, as opposed to just it's used in about 5 other ways, but that's a major way. Today, it's pretty hot outside. That's what's happening outside. So basically, they contribute to a water vapor cycle, and that is a major important fact for us. They transpire, and so basically when there's a lot less heat, basically a lot less heat to get trapped by greenhouse gases, although it's a complicated question, and it's way beyond probably my pay grade as well as a lot of other people, but there's a bunch of different issues there. But basically, trees reflect light, UV and visual light, a certain amount, but they're basically fairly dark, so they absorb a fair amount of heat and then give it the heat back up as evaporative cooling. It's what they do. But researchers have looked at this, and they basically think that the tropical forests near the equator have a strong cooling effect. The boreal ones near the Arctic, the conifer forests near the Arctic, and temperate ones, cold temperate ones, tend to be variation by season. They basically are very warm compared to just bare ground with snow on it in the wintertime. The boreal ones are, but in the summer they are somewhat cooling. So they're basically a forest in, say, Alberta in the mountains is basically has a warming effect. But if you get temperate forests further south, say Pennsylvania or somewhere, it's moderate cooling, just tiny little bit of cooling. But when you get to say something like Texas, it's a moderate cooling effect. And of course, in the tropics, it's a strong cooling effect. So if we planted more forests here wherever you could, we would be helping to cool the planet. And if we growing fruit trees will do this up into the air, but some of it goes into rivers, and the rivers go to the sea. How do they get water? Where does the water come from? Why don't they run out of water in a forest, say in the middle of South America? Because the Amazon is a river, and it isn't just a big company. It's also a river, and water goes to the sea. So how does it get back there? And the basic answer is that when plants evapotranspire water into the air, it creates a low pressure area that's lower in pressure than the ocean, and it drags water in through convection like this, and that's what's happening. As long as you have forests all the way from the coast to the interior. You want to get water in Texas, forest the place. And if you cut down all the forests and all the prairie, and It's just a matter, and this is the actual bioscience article, if you should want to check that out. So basically, forests grow rainfall, rainfall grows forests, and the only thing we really need to do, this is an explanation of how this happens. I'm not going to go through this. It is, this is one of these subjects that gets us into a tremendous amount of like physics, biology, climatology, and then people. It really pushes the limit, but it is a fact that water does come inland from oceans because of lower pressure in the interior where there are forests. And they think this is the reason. The reason is basically that in the tropics, every kilometer of height, of altitude, you lose about 6 degrees Celsius because you're further and further away from the planet. And what that does is, as the hot air from the evaporation rises, it condenses, and that creates an upward draft, which is why you get this this movement of water inland and then back out to the sea. The basic fact is that if we planted a lot more plants, we could reverse an awful lot of global warming, and that water is, of course, what we use. The water that comes out of our taps in Houston comes from rivers that are inland, so it's in our interest. This is a forested area here. And this is a typical urbanized one. Notice how much more runoff there is. Notice how much water sinks in. Notice how much water goes up into the air. Basically, you really would be much better off with this than with that. This is a comparison that an Urban Harvest supporter, Rick Boston, and I did years ago. This is 1915 runoff from probably White Oak Bayou. This is 2000 runoff from Braze Bayou. This is the speed of the runoff in gallons, cubic feet of water per second. So basically, when you have lots of plants, it slows the whole release down and probably don't release anywhere near as much water even. It sinks in and recharges your water table and grows plants. So basically, could reforesting the planet give us more time to fix things? I think it's certainly true that it could. This is the amount of total carbon in the soils at the moment across the planet. That amount, this is the amount in the vegetation, this is the amount in the soil itself. And this is how much land we have in the different continents that are cropland that could be conceivably converted if we cut out animal feed crops and no grazing, just allowed the, we did that. And then there are things you can do, like in arid climates, you can start using this permaculture technique called key line, which basically allows you to trap water long enough to grow trees and grow some water and grow some soil. And this is China before and after, the same place once they started using sensible water catchment techniques. That's 20 years apart, but it's still quite an amazing change. That's in the John Liu, Liu film that is on. So all of us, if we pitch in, could do an awful lot that would be good, that would revegetate Texas, could revegetate the planet. And it's not even necessarily very costly or even disruptive for most people. It's not too late to avoid the worst. And I don't think hundreds of miles of prairies and forests sounds all that bad to me at all. This is a permaculture diagram of how to design things so we don't mess this up. And that's in my book. So that's where we are, but I think we could do it. And it says 11:29 on my clock, which is probably 11:28. So I'm done.
Thank you so much, Bob. I hope you guys can stay on the phone because Bob says he'll go as long as we need to. So Carol, if you want to take over and talk about what came up in the chat and the question and answer section.
One of the questions that came up was how can we effectively change the leadership of schools so that the importance of the environment is affected on campuses?
Well, okay, that's a very good question. And the way I see in the case of ISD schools in Texas is that what basically principals are being held accountable for is determined by the state government. To some degree, that's modulated by the ISD administration, Houston ISD, whatever it is. So that what a principal needs to do is basically, first of all, carry out whatever they were hired to carry out, which when I was paying attention to this problem, it was mainly test scores. And my sense was, and may be wrong, and actually both Carol and Lily are probably more aware of this than I am, but my sense was that if you did a good job improving kids' test scores based on the curriculum that was been created in Austin, that they would let you do just about anything you wanted to, provided that would work. But trying to get them to do things that aren't improving test scores or aren't part of the curriculum is very hard because they're not being asked to use their resources to do that. So I tried to get principals to fight hunger, for example, for quite a long time before I realized that basically it wasn't in the curriculum. And you either have to change that curriculum, which is not an easy thing to do, or you have to figure out how, given what they are being asked to do, what each principal is being asked to do. And I'm getting away from the fact that they may have some options themselves in terms of what their personal likes are and dislikes and things, but that isn't what works. And that if you're looking at any institution, not just schools, it's a question of what it is they're trying to accomplish as an institution. And if you can show them how doing that will help, then and prove it basically. And I think we did prove it with test scores. I think, but that was something I was actually taught by Gary Edmondson, not by me. But he was right about that. That as soon as we started showing how you could use, say, regenerative farming techniques in a way that improved people's test scores, it was helpful. So that was my take on it. And that's true if you're a homeless shelter. It doesn't matter what it is. If you were a corporation, if you're asking a question, well, how do you get them to do what they should do? If you can show them it's in their interest, it'll really help.
Yes, thanks, Bob. So definitely with any organization, demonstrating the impact and effectiveness of ecology to the participants, I think is part of that circle of regenerative practices. So Karen North posted a lot of resources in the questions, and I've copied those and uploaded it to an email so that we can email it. So Lily can have it to email all the participants afterwards, because she's doing a lot of action on the grassroots level and with high school students in leadership. And she also mentioned some policy in the works to mandate outdoor time within the curriculum. So as they're fulfilling PE curriculum credits, part of it is a certain number of minutes outdoors. Okay, so we have a question from David. Has the local climate and recommended vegetables and plants been analyzed for other areas, such as Texas Hill Country and Fredericksburg?
Not that I know of. Basically, the model I proposed here, as far as I know, not being used anywhere on the planet yet. And I think the reason is that in universities, particularly, these people are very specialized. I used to be a university professor, and anthropology is one of the most wide-ranging. We're pretty fearless about using science from wherever we can find it. And a lot of, if you're a specialist, say, researching peaches, you may be paying attention to what's going on with peaches and weather, but you're not really doing this. But I looked very hard for what research people were doing on climate change and plants. And there's a lot of work being done on, say, temperatures and corn, let's say, big main market crops, rice, for example. But there's not much being done on broccoli, none at all that I could find. And I spent quite a bit of time trying to find out how hot a temperature oats would grow at. And I couldn't find out. All I found was in places that grow a lot of oats that they told farmers that you can't grow oats if it's too hot. But I couldn't find out what too hot was.
Right, it's like a huge body of research that is needed. And also part of the work that you're doing and monitoring and tracking the temperature for our area and our region could be replicated across the state.
Yes, and in my book, the temperature tables that I have and in that book, in Fredericksburg, those temperatures are still the same temperatures, and Debbie's calling from Maine. Those temperatures are the same temperatures you need in Maine for those plants. The question is, when do you have those temperatures, and do you have them? And so you could do that in Fredericksburg. You're just going to have to look at what the last 10 years or so of your weather has been. And and once you do that, you can map your planting into that. If you need 3 months to grow collards, temperatures under 75, do you have it? And if you don't, you're going to have to grow them part of the time in a hoop house or a greenhouse or something.
So we do have a message from Susie Shapiro, who wanted me to announce, or wanted us to announce, the latest updates on our fruit tree sale for this year. And it may be that this year, given the situation and guidelines, it may be all online ordering. So that is still under development for this year, because the new date for the annual fruit tree sale has been shifted from January to February. So I know that the committee is hard at work on that. Anyone like to raise their hand to come onto the call, because it's 11:38. And if you want to join us here on the panelist side, I'll open it up so it's more like a Zoom meeting, and we can move you over to come to the stage to chat with Bob up here on the stage. Nancy Edwards, she did post in the chat, the City of Houston Climate Change Week is August 24th to the 28th, which is free. Debbie Entune does have a question. Is the idea to have livestock feed be limited to non-human consumption feed with Texas A&M?
I have no idea what Texas A&M is thinking about, but this needs to be part of a plan to replace animal feed. You know, if somebody is growing corn, let's say for animal feed in Fort Bend, they are going to need to have something else to do and to make money. So you need a just transition, among other things. You don't want to just impoverish somebody. And so they need to get paid to put a prairie in or a forest in. And we need to figure out how to finance that. But as far as I know, there's nobody planning to do that at the moment anywhere. I'm pointing out that the grim prospects, which are going to be very apparent, and changes are going to have to be made, and it's going to be very easily apparent to government and people, just like this pandemic is. They're going to have to do something. But what I'm saying is that there are things that can be done that wouldn't even displace most of us a whole lot. I mean, you might have to eat less meat or something, but it wouldn't, I mean, it's very practical. I mean, you could pay that corn farmer to stop growing corn and start growing prairie, or start growing forests, or start growing pecans or something.
Yes. So this is a question to follow up with that, which is from Andrea. And she would like to know, what are your recommendations for a backyard gardener in Houston? How much food is it reasonable to grow in, say, 4 3x6 beds?
Well, so if we're doing vegetables, you could grow a fair amount of food there. I would say that you could grow a significant amount of stuff there. First place I ever saw anybody growing a lot of food in a small space, they were growing cauliflower in pots on their roof. There's an amazing amount of that stuff. Fruit trees are relatively, if you grow in Houston areas, citrus and persimmons and a few other things, there are a lot of trees that are pretty decorative and produce a lot of food with almost no work. So that's one thing to just mention there. But when you get to vegetables, there's a lot of vegetables you can grow 12 months a year in Houston. And some things you can produce an awful lot of lettuce in a couple square feet, and an awful lot of carrots in a couple square feet. Carrots can be spaced at 1-inch spacing, so 2 square feet. Theoretically, you can grow 288 carrots in 2 square feet. So getting 100 carrots out of 2 square feet, I don't think it's hard to do.
And then when you go vertical, you get even more.
Yeah, I mean, they basically intensive growing. There's an awful lot you can do.
So in 72 square feet, you can grow a lot of fruits and vegetables year round. So you have annuals and perennials, such as fruit trees, to reforest our urban areas. We have Beth, who earlier asked any school gardens in our area that we can help with. So Beth, if you could post in which area you're in, or you can look at our affiliate garden map and look at the nearest community and school gardens near you. And then we have Andrea. She wants to know if fruit trees can be planted in public spaces for public consumption. She rents at the house she's in, and she has a few garden beds and pots, but fruit trees are more expensive.
The short answer, there are a number of places where there are fruit trees available for public consumption, in a sense. There are a lot of community gardens with fruit trees. And if you join a community garden, that's one of the reasons for having a community garden, if you have a limited amount of land. And if you have a limited budget, it is worth pointing out that fruit trees don't have to be expensive either. A lot of the citrus trees I planted from seed. And learning to graft, G-R-A-F-T, you can graft fruit trees pretty darn easily. Figs you can root from cuttings. You just need to learn the technique, and the techniques are not hard to learn. I've had people learn how to graft successfully in 30 minutes. And if you just have 1 or 2 buds off a plant and the right rootstock, you can graft it with a single-edged razor blade. So
Yes, Bob.
I'm just saying that that's how you get a fruit tree, and I don't think they're expensive for what you get out of them. But I've been very poor myself at times, and I realized that even $10 is hard to come by some places and sometimes.
Mm-hmm. For resources for folks who are interested in doing that, some guerrilla grafting of fruit trees, which groups in Houston can they connect to?
Well, in non-pandemic times, there often were classes given on this. But as far as grafting techniques are concerned, first of all, in my book, there's some section on grafting. But the internet has lots and lots of descriptions. So if you were to Google a video, look for a video on grafting, say, whatever it was you wanted, apples or oranges or whatever, you probably would find quite a bit of stuff. And if you, not just the videos, but if you look for written materials, there are a lot of stuff on the internet on how to do it. What I recommend people doing is, if they wanted to say, I would suggest that they take a tree that they have or have access to and cut a branch off of it and graft it back on. Same tree, just practice on that. But before you do that, I would just take a branch, take it inside, and practice grafting it sitting at a table. It's never going to live because it's just a branch, but you have to learn how to fit these things together properly, and that's basically like doing surgery. So you need hand skills, and you need the right tools, and you need all this stuff. But once you can figure you can do it, then do it on a live plant that you have. And once you're good at that, get somebody else's lovely orange or grapefruit or apple or whatever and graft it onto your apple tree, or your fig under your fig tree. But figs, we just take a cutting and root it.
Yes, and fig trees in the archaeological history of humankind have been the first documented evidence of the first plant that was propagated. And so Andrea did ask that since she's renting, it takes 2 years to plant a fruit tree, and that she wouldn't be there to take part of the fruit. So what are solutions to that? And also panelists, in the audience, you can also answer in the chat. If you're renting, do you plant a fruit tree at your place, or where in community shared spaces have you planted a fruit tree?
So I had gardens in at least probably close to 10 different rental places in 3 foreign countries, actually, before I moved to Houston. And first of all, there are some things that will produce in 1 year. Strawberries will do that, and cantaloupes will do that. They're very short, 3-4 months, and you got fruit. Blackberries take 2 years, but they can easily be grown in pots. So that's the first thing. There are some things, like if you knew you were going to move to a place where you could plant it, there are a bunch of things you can grow in pots for a year or 2 and then plant them. So that's not a hard thing to do. I've told people, though, that if you can afford it and allowed to, planting on a rental property where you're not going to get the food is a way to practice growing fruit trees. And I killed a bunch of fruit trees, especially when I first started doing this. I think I have 1 fruit tree that I planted 40 years ago, and a couple that I planted maybe 38 years ago. And everything else has died that I started back then.
Excellent. Yeah, it's like Mother Nature. It's important for us to sow the seeds, plant the trees, because those trees may die. So like Mother Nature, we have to have hundreds, just all of the individual actions out in the community of planting and growing. And one thing that I have experienced unexpectedly is that since I was renting or I didn't have any more space to plant at home, I would give away fruit trees and plant for my mom and my sisters. And they have since gifted me the fruit in subsequent years in which I had forgotten about that tree. And so it was a really nice surprise. I think that's about everything. And so Nancy's information on the Climate Change Week with the City of Houston, I have uploaded that to the email, so we'll be able to email it out to you. So if you want to be part of that group in climate action, in which they meet monthly in Zoom, you can stay connected through that. And I'd like to say thank you, Bob, for joining us this morning, taking time out of your day to impact future generations.
Hope so. And good luck on everything. And get planting.
Yes, everybody. Okay, so let's get planting. So thank
Thanks,
you, Lily.
Thanks, everybody, for coming. We appreciate it. Thanks, Bob.